I think my generation is the last that will have seen Segovia perform live. When we're all gone, the records will still be there, and the records will be a very important calling card, not only showing us what Segovia did, what Segovia's sound and style was, and what his repertory was, but also telling us a lot about the performance style of his time. Segovia saw recordings as very useful things. They weren't just vanity productions. If you look at the 27 recordings he made for HMV between 1927 and 1939, his first body of recordings, you see that there are a few, and a very few, instances of classical guitar pieces composed for the guitar in the 19th century. For instance, Sohr's Mozart variations. The war cut Segovia's early recording career short. In the mid-1940s, however, he began recording again for the Musicraft label, a small American firm, which allowed him to record one of his big projects, the Bach Chaconne. In the late 1940s, he began recording for the American Decca label. At first, he continued recording for LP in very much the same way he recorded for 78, short pieces, usually single movements. In 1956, he began working with a Decca producer named Israel Horowitz. Suddenly, Segovia was recording complete multi-movement sonatas, the Ponce sonatas, for instance. Unfortunately, it was around that time that Decca was sold to MCA. MCA had decided to specialize largely in rock recordings, although they did keep some of their classical discs, including the Segovia discography, in their catalog. But Segovia announced at the time that he didn't want anything to do with hippies, and that he would therefore not record for Decca any further. He hated it, and he never stopped hating it, and he never stopped disliking the electric guitar. And he considered that electrifying the guitar robbed the instrument of its poetry. Once in the mid-60s, the Beatles were at Heathrow Airport in London ready to tour the United States, and they were asked by a journalist what they thought of Segovia. George Harrison, the Beatles' lead guitarist, said, "Segovia, he's the daddy of us all." Later, Harrison's comment was reported to Segovia, and Segovia said, "Daddy of them all, they're not even my illegitimate children, they play the electric guitar." Segovia regarded television in very much the same way he regarded recordings. He saw television as a way of bringing his instrument, his art, and the music he loved to a large audience. In 1967, he also was the host of a program filmed at the Prado Museum in Madrid with Victoria de Los Angeles and Alicia de la Rocha. In 1979, he played a concert at the White House that was broadcast nationally on PBS.
Good afternoon from the White House, where Vice President Mondale is hosting a recital by the great Spanish guitarist Andres Segovia.
I recall in a concert that Segovia was doing, he would come out on stage, and this was a trick of his, and it was wonderful, because he'd come out on stage and he'd sit down, and the audience would get sort of quiet. And he'd wait till they got a little more quiet. And then he'd kind of bend over the guitar, and he'd form some kind of a chord, and he'd bend over, and he'd just go like this with his hand. He'd go. And you realized you hadn't heard anything. So then the audience got more quiet, and then he'd start.